Verified department records. Genuine field evidence. Unbiased justice. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
Step aside. Now. This is a police matter.
You have no warrant, no jurisdiction, and no authority here.
I don't care who you think you are. Move, or I move you.
Touch me, and you'll be explaining this to the Department of Justice.
At exactly 2:14 a.m. on a humid Tuesday morning in Miami, Florida, a confrontation occurred that would ripple through the law enforcement community for decades. A veteran police sergeant, driven by ego and adrenaline, walked into the cardiac wing of Jackson Memorial Hospital and attempted to force his way past a man he underestimated. He had no warrant. He had no jurisdiction. He had no idea that the quiet, intense man standing guard was not hospital security, but a senior DEA special agent who had spent the last 10 years dismantling the most violent cartels in the hemisphere. What followed wasn't just an argument. It was the total deconstruction of a man's life captured in high definition on hospital security cameras. It serves as a brutal reminder that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Before we dive into the details of this night, I have a request. Take a moment to leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. And if you believe in accountability, please hit that subscribe button. The story you are about to hear is a masterclass in discipline versus arrogance, and you need to hear every word of it. Special Agent Marcus Thorne was a man who understood the value of silence. At 34 years old, he carried himself with a gravity that made him seem a decade older. While his peers in the Drug Enforcement Administration were often eager to kick down doors and make headlines, Thorne operated in the shadows. He was a ghost. Based out of the Miami Field Division, Thorne specialized in high-level counter-narcotics and money laundering operations. Thorne's background was forged in discipline. He was born in Atlanta, the son of a strict military father and a mother who worked as a trauma nurse. He learned early on that true strength wasn't about aggression. It was about control. He had served in the Army Rangers, completing 3 tours in hostile environments where a split-second loss of composure meant death. When he transitioned to federal law enforcement, he brought that combat patience with him. He didn't view law enforcement as a game of cops and robbers. He viewed it as a complex chess match. For the last 2 years, Thorne had been the lead case agent on Operation Silent Harbor, a massive investigation targeting a transnational syndicate moving narcotics through the port of Miami. The investigation was airtight, built on wiretaps, financial forensics, and the cultivation of a single terrified insider witness. That witness was Elena Rostova, 22 years old, a former accountant for the syndicate who had seen too much. She wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was a girl who got trapped in a web of debt and fear. When she finally reached out to the DEA, she was shaking. She offered the ledger. She offered the names. In exchange, she wanted a new life. Thorne had made her a promise. I will keep you safe. 2 days ago, the syndicate had tried to silence her. A car bomb meant to kill had detonated early. Elena survived with severe concussions and shrapnel wounds, but she was alive. Thorne had her transported to Jackson Memorial Hospital under a relentless security detail. He trusted no one. He didn't trust the local police. He didn't trust the hospital staff, and he barely trusted his own team. That is why at 2:00 a.m., Thorne was standing the mid-watch himself outside her ICU room. He stood perfectly still. He was dressed in a dark tailored suit, his badge clipped to his belt, but visible only if he swept back his jacket. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't leaning against the wall. He was scanning the hallway, a predator waiting for a threat. The threat arrived in the elevator. Sergeant Rick "Bulldog" Miller was a 45-year-old relic of a bygone era. A 25-year veteran of the Miami-Dade Police Department, Miller was the head of a specialized street crimes unit known as the Impact Team. In the 1990s, Miller had been a star. He was known for his aggression, his arrest numbers, and his ability to clear street corners. But the world had changed, and Miller hadn't. Miller was a man who believed the badge on his chest granted him ownership of the city. He had a thick file with internal affairs complaints of intimidation, procedural violations, and verbal abuse. Each time he survived. The union protected him, or the complaints were deemed unsubstantiated. He had convinced himself that he was the only thing standing between order and chaos. On this particular night, Miller was frustrated. His unit was under pressure to close a series of high-profile shootings related to a turf war. He had received a vague tip from a street informant that a woman involved in the cartel money movements was at Jackson Memorial. Miller didn't run the name through the databases. He didn't call the station to check for federal holds. He saw an opportunity to grab a suspect, sweat her for information, and break his case wide open before the morning news cycle. He didn't bother getting a warrant. In Miller's mind, exigent circumstances was a phrase he could use to justify anything. If he got the confession, the lawyers could fight about the details later. Miller arrived on the cardiac floor with 2 rookie officers trailing behind him. He walked with a heavy, stomping gait, his tactical vest burdened with extra magazines and gear he didn't need for a hospital visit. He was sweating, his face flushed with the humidity and high blood pressure. When he turned the corner and saw Thorne, Miller didn't see a federal agent. He saw an obstacle. He saw a black man in a suit standing where he didn't belong. Miller's bias, honed over years of unchecked aggression, instantly categorized Thorne as private security, or maybe a bodyguard for a criminal. Miller approached, his voice booming in the quiet hallway. "You, step away from the door. Police business." Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply shifted his gaze to Miller's eyes, dissecting the man's intent. "Lower your voice, Sergeant. This is an intensive care unit. People are recovering." Miller stopped 3 feet from Thorne. The proximity was a tactic. He used his size and smell stale coffee and sweat to intimidate. "I'm not here to whisper, pal. I'm here for the girl in 402. She's a person of interest in a double homicide investigation. Now move or I move you." Thorne's response was calm, almost monotone. "This patient is under federal protective custody. No one enters this room without authorization from the United States Attorney's Office. If you have a warrant, present it. If you don't, turn around and walk away." Have you ever been in a situation where someone refused to listen to reason because their ego was too loud? I want to know how you handled it. Drop a comment below. Miller laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Federal custody, I don't see any feds. I see a guy in a suit blocking a police investigation. I'm giving you a lawful order. Interference with a police officer is a felony in this state. Do you want to go to jail tonight?" "I am Special Agent Marcus Thorne, Drug Enforcement Administration." Thorne slowly moved his hand to his belt, revealing the gold shield and his credentials. "I am the lawful authority here. You have no jurisdiction over this witness. You are dismissed, Sergeant." The word dismissed hit Miller like a slap in the face. He wasn't used to being told what to do, certainly not by someone younger, and certainly not in front of his 2 rookie officers. He felt his authority crumbling, and his instinct was to double down. "I don't care if you're the director of the FBI." Miller spat, his hand drifting toward his radio. "I have probable cause. This woman is linked to a shooting in my district. I'm going in." "You have no probable cause?" Thorne corrected his voice, dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "You have a rumor. You have no warrant. You have no coordination with this task force, and you are about to cross a line you can't come back from." Here is where the situation diverged from the typical shouting match. In most cases, the local officer would back down or call a supervisor. But Miller was desperate. He needed a win. He looked at his rookies, needing to perform for them. "I'm declaring this a crime scene," Miller announced, improvising a legal justification that didn't exist. "Officer down involved. That gives me immediate access. Step aside, agent, or I will physically remove you for obstruction." Thorne shifted his stance. It was subtle. He widened his base, his hands staying open and visible near his chest. The universal gesture of, "I don't want to fight," but also the starting position for high-level defensive tactics. "Do not touch me," Thorne said, "and do not attempt to enter this room." Miller made his choice. "You're under arrest." Miller reached out, his heavy hand clamping onto Thorne's left shoulder, attempting to spin him around and slam him into the wall, a move Miller had used hundreds of times on street corners. It was a mistake. Thorne didn't spin. He didn't stumble. The moment Miller's hand made contact, Thorne rotated his wrist, trapping Miller's hand against his chest. With a fluid, terrifyingly fast motion, Thorne stepped into Miller's space, not away from it. He used an Aikido leverage point, pivoting his hips and driving his elbow up under Miller's armpit while simultaneously sweeping Miller's lead leg. It wasn't a fight. It was a correction. Miller, a man who weighed 240 pounds, found himself airborne. He slammed onto the hospital linoleum with a bone-rattling thud. Before Miller could process the impact, Thorne was on one knee, pinning Miller's wrist in a control lock that utilized pain compliance. The two rookie officers panicked. Their hands flew to their holsters. "Stop!" Thorne's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command that echoed off the sterile walls. "Hand off the weapon. Now." Thorne looked at the rookies, his eyes burning with intensity. "I am a federal agent. Your sergeant just assaulted a federal officer. If you draw those weapons, you will be considered active threats to a federal witness. Back away. Now." The rookies froze. They looked at their sergeant groaning on the floor, then at the calm, lethal professional controlling him. They took their hands off their holsters and stepped back, palms up. Miller, humiliated and in pain, made the worst decision of his life. His free hand clawed at his belt. He wasn't reaching for handcuffs. He was reaching for his taser, intending to drive stun Thorne. Thorne felt the movement. He didn't strike Miller. He simply applied 3 more pounds of pressure to the wrist lock. Miller screamed. "Do not do it," Thorne whispered into Miller's ear. "Do not add a weapons charge to this. Look at the camera, Sergeant. Look at it." Thorne nodded his head toward the ceiling corner where the red light of the dome camera blinked steadily. "Everything you are doing is recorded. Your career is ending right now. Don't make your life end too." Miller stopped. His hand hovered over the taser, shaking. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the cold, crushing weight of reality. He realized he was pinned to the floor of a hospital by a man who hadn't even broken a sweat. "Let me up," Miller gasped. "Not until my supervisor and your watch commander are here," Thorne said. "You are detained." Thorne pulled his radio from his belt with his free hand. "Control, this is Agent Thorne at Jackson Memorial. I have a code 10-10 involving a local officer. Request immediate supervisor response from MPD and Federal Protective Detail backup. 1 subject detained." For 10 minutes, silence hung heavy in the hallway. Thorne didn't move. He kept Miller pinned, not with cruelty, but with absolute stability. Passers-by, nurses, doctors, families of patients stopped and stared. They saw a scene that defied logic, a police sergeant on the floor dominated by a man in a suit. When Captain Vance of the Miami-Dade Police arrived, he looked tired. He knew Miller. He knew Miller's reputation. When he saw the situation, he didn't yell. He just closed his eyes for a second, exhaling a long sigh of resignation. "Agent Thorne," Captain Vance said, walking over. "I assume you have a reason for pinning my sergeant to the floor. Attempted unauthorized entry into a federal protective zone assault on a federal officer, and attempted use of a weapon during an unlawful detainment." Thorne recited, releasing the pressure, but not the grip. He failed to identify jurisdiction and initiated physical contact after being warned 3 times. Vance looked down at Miller. "Rick, tell me you didn't grab a Fed." Miller scrambled up as Thorne released him, dusting off his uniform, his face purple with rage and embarrassment. He blocked a murder investigation cap. He refused to identify. "I was doing my job." "I identified myself and showed credentials," Thorne said calmly. "The video will confirm this." Vance looked at the camera. He looked at Thorne's composed demeanor. Then he looked at his sweaty, disheveled sergeant. "Rick, give me your gun and your badge," Vance said quietly. "What, you're taking his side?" Miller shouted. "I'm taking the side of the law, Rick. You don't walk into a hospital and wrestle a DEA agent. You're done for the night. Surrender them, now." The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. The DEA didn't view this as a misunderstanding. They viewed it as a threat to a witness's life. A formal complaint was filed with the Department of Justice. The Miami-Dade Internal Affairs Division sat down to watch the tape. It was brutal. The video showed Thorne standing peacefully. It showed Miller invading his personal space. It showed the clear display of credentials. It captured the audio of Thorne's warnings. And most damningly, it showed Miller initiating the violence and then reaching for a weapon while the agent was subduing him. During his disciplinary hearing, Miller tried to argue that he was under stress, that the heat of the moment justified his actions. He argued that Thorne should have been more cooperative. The review board chair, a civilian oversight director, asked one question. "Sergeant Miller, if Agent Thorne had been a white officer in a uniform, would you have put your hands on him?" Miller couldn't answer. The silence in the room was deafening. The outcome was definitive. Sergeant Rick Miller was terminated for cause excessive force conduct unbecoming and assault on a fellow officer. Because of the Giglio ruling, which requires prosecutors to disclose information that compromises an officer's credibility, Miller was placed on a do not call list. No prosecutor would ever put him on a stand again. His testimony was worthless. He was unhireable in law enforcement. But the story didn't end there for Miller. In a cruel twist of fate, the pension he had been 6 months away from fully vesting was severely reduced due to the nature of his termination misconduct involving a felony-level assault, even if charges weren't criminally pursued as a professional courtesy. He lost nearly 40% of his retirement income. 6 months later, the Silent Harbor case went to trial. Elena Rostova testified. Her testimony, safe and secure because of the protection Thorne provided, led to the conviction of 3 high-ranking cartel lieutenants and the seizure of $40 million in assets. And Rick Miller, the man who once thought he owned the streets of Miami, found a new job. He works the night shift at a gated community in Fort Lauderdale, checking IDs at a booth. He wears a uniform that looks like a police uniform, but it has no authority. He waves cars through, watching the world move on without him. Sometimes, late at night, he probably thinks about that hallway. He thinks about the moment he decided his pride was more important than the protocol. He thinks about the man in the suit who gave him a chance to walk away. What can we learn from this? We live in a world that glorifies being loud. We are taught that to be alpha, to be a leader, you have to dominate the space. You have to shout over people. You have to impose your will. But this story teaches us the exact opposite. True power is quiet. True authority doesn't need to scream. Marcus Thorne could have fought Miller immediately. He could have drawn his weapon. He could have shouted back. But he didn't. He relied on his training, his legal standing, and his composure. He gave Miller every opportunity to do the right thing. The lesson here is about ego versus purpose. Miller was driven by ego, how he looked, how he felt his need to be right. Thorne was driven by purpose, protecting the witness, upholding the law, completing the mission. When you operate from ego, you are fragile. One challenge, one insult, and you shatter. When you operate from purpose, you are immovable. In your own life, you will meet people like Rick Miller, people who try to bulldoze you, who make assumptions about you, who try to take what isn't theirs. Do not become them. Do not lower yourself to their volume. Stand your ground. Know your value. Know your jurisdiction in your own life. And remember, when you are right, you don't need to be loud. The truth has its own volume. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about how you handle conflict, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever won a battle by staying silent while the other person destroyed themselves? Until next time, stay safe, stay calm, and watch your 6.
This concludes today's report. To access more official footage, please like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.